When someone accidentally threw away the school play costumes,
Oh no!
replacements were shipped with FedEx. And with picture proof of delivery, everyone could focus on the perfect opening night. FedEx, where now meets next. For residential delivery only.
Bienvenidas al podcast Dos Bold Latinas. Aquí están sus hosts, Jatna Abreu
y Rosibel Madera Vialets, dos latinas feministas born in Santo Domingo y in New York.
Passionate about Latina empowerment, Spanglish,
learning, growth, and so much more.
Hola mujeres, welcome to our first Bold Latina chat. Le queremos dar la bienvenida a Emny de León y Marilisa Rodríguez, las cuales estarán compartiendo, al igual que Rosibel y yo, sobre sus experiencias como mujeres dominicanas aquí en los Estados Unidos. También les quiero dar la bienvenida for the second time around a my baby sister and Bold Latina therapist, Loana Abreu, who will be our moderator for today's chat. So, let me explain how we're doing this today. Basically, Loana, our moderator, will be asking a series of questions to Rosibel, Emny, Marilisa, and myself about our lives growing up in a Dominican household while living in the U.S. I want to clarify that Rosibel and I are light-skinned Dominican women, while Emny and Marilisa are dark-skinned Dominican women. The reason why I wanted to share this is because you will probably notice that our experiences will sound very different based on our skin color. So I will hand that over to my sister, Loana, and she will get us started.
Welcome, everyone. And like my sister said, I'm Loana Abreu, and I will be the moderator today. So as we all have seen and heard, the Black Lives Matter movement is going on and it's strong. However, this movement has also posed many identity questions within many Latinx communities and circles. A few weeks back, I was talking to my significant other and my best friends, and the question, what do I identify as, has been asked several times, not just by them, but by others. In today's episode, we are going to dive into 4 unique stories. Before we start the chat, I want to say some ground rules for the girls. So this is a safe space, and we're all educated women. Please respect each other, listen, and allow other participants to finish their train of thought. And remember, we are here to learn from each other, not judge each other, respect each other, each individual's experience. So with that being said, we're gonna start with the questions. So the first question is for Emny and Marilisa, and I would like for you guys to tell us a little bit about yourselves. Where were you born? Where do you currently live? What's your profession? And how will you describe yourself?
It's me, Emny. I was born in the Bronx, New York, and I currently live on the outs of Cleveland, so maybe 15 minutes from downtown Cleveland. My current profession right now is an IT auditor, so I majored in accounting, but right now I'm focusing on the IT side of auditing. I will describe myself as someone that is bubbly, silly. When you first meet me, very serious, but besides that, very bubbly and silly, and very positive person.
Hi, ladies. My name is Marilisa. I was born in the Dominican Republic, San Francisco, in the north. I currently live in New York City, in Queens, in the metropolitan area. I work in the health information management in a hospital in Brooklyn. I would describe myself as a very shy person when you first meet me, but once I get comfortable, I'm really fun. I'm very empathetic with others. I'm a really caring person, and I always try to see the best in everyone, regardless of who they are, what they're from, and the culture and the background.
So now we're gonna move on to our second question. Can you guys tell me a little bit about your childhood? What was it like growing up being Dominican in each of your families? And this question is for Emny and Rosie.
So my childhood was different. So I was born in New York, but mostly raised a little bit in Jersey, and then most of my life in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And my household was, you spoke Spanish completely. And my parents had, mostly my dad had it, that you didn't mix both languages. So you wouldn't do like if you spoke English, you spoke English. If you spoke Spanish, you spoke Spanish, but don't mix the two. So that if we were to speak with somebody like one of our family in DR, you were able to describe something. So you wouldn't easily jump back to English because then it'll be like, what are you what are you saying to me? We grew up in a community that was mostly Black and Latino. Um, and I was always, but I went to school in areas like my elementary was predominantly white. And then my middle school was predominantly Black. So then growing up, it's always the question of like, which side do I pick? Do I like, in school, they look like me, but they don't speak like me. They don't speak Spanish like me. But then when I'm in high school, I had the mix of both. Then it was almost as if you had to choose which side you wanted to be on. Did you want to be like with the Black kids and like people that look like you, or do you want to be with Latinos that spoke the language and understood your culture? But then thankfully, I found a group that were mixed in both, that they didn't force you to separate. But my family was we're a very close-knit family, a family that wasn't, I guess we didn't really, like, we talked about race, but it wasn't something that was always on the topic. My dad's darker skin, my mom's lighter skin, but it wasn't like, it was always all this like positive skin color environment. So to me, it was never, like I always saw my Blackness as something positive, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. What about you, Rosie?
So I was born in New York City, in Washington Heights, in Manhattan. So it's like mini DR to me. And I mean, I remember being in preschool, kindergarten, yo me vestía con mis vestidos dominicanos, bailaba la mangolina. And so it's like everywhere I went, everyone spoke Spanish. In my home, everything was Spanish, all music Spanish. I moved to Grand Rapids when I was 8 years old, and I was talking to Jenna about this the other day. I'm like, I grew up in my circle. It's like all Latinas. I can't. It's like I have a sibling. He knows he is so diverse, and I have just stayed in this bubble of not diversifying myself. So when I'm listening to Emmy talk, I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't remember having to choose sides. It's like I'm still trying to identify in myself. Why did in high school, middle school, even now as an adult, I still have friends that are Latino. I mean, they're not just Dominican, pero son Mexicana, Boricua, like it's like, and so it's just really interesting to hear the different perspectives. And 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 the whole childhood, I just think my parents just stayed in their roots, that I grew up, que lo que yo cocino es dominicano, la música que yo escucho es dominicana. En el trabajo me dicen like, oh, you dress so colorful, like it's like, you know, how do you pull off wearing all those colors so well? So to me, like all of that, it's like, yo soy dominicana, porque realmente it's like you don't really see other people pulling that off, except in us as a Latina, especialmente dominicana, que yo me puedo poner unos pantalones mamey con una blusa verde, for example, you know?
So, we're killing it. We will rock those colors.
So to me, like I feel like I grew up feeling like I would go to the art and yo sentía así porque me decían, ah, no, tú eres de para afuera. But I didn't feel como americana, like aunque yo nací aquí, porque yo comía lo mismo, yo escuchaba la misma música, el lenguaje, como mi español no era, ok, yo no sé de cierta palabra, así como en mi casa todo era dominicano, español, hasta la tambora, hasta el día de hoy, así están mis hijos ahora. Yo tengo 2 niños, me casé con un dominicano, I'll talk more about that later, pero que realmente I like it, like yo soy orgullosa de que todavía yo puedo seguir esa cultura de generación a generación, pero sí me gustaría, en esta jornada de ahora estoy aprendiendo más a aprender más de más cultura. Y no es como que lo he hecho intencionalmente, porque sí he tenido interacciones siendo pequeña, pero me he dado cuenta de que crecí como en ese safe zone de estar personas así que se parecen a lo que yo conocí en mi casa. Gracias.
And this is a perfect segue because I think Emily and Rosie talked about our next question, which is for Jana and Marilisa. Did any of you have any family traditions? If so, do you still carry those traditions?
So, I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, as many of you know. And so I moved here when I was 14 or 15 years old. And I remember that even coming here, we still kept all of our traditions, as in like we still cook the same Dominican food that we cooked in the DR. Like we still eat arroz, habichuela y carne, anything Dominican. We still cook it up to this day. Even my son, I have a son, and he also like loves arroz y habichuela y pollo. So I still cook all of that. I know that we also celebrate like Dominican Mother's Day, Dominican Father's Day. We usually, again, we still speak our language within our household. And it just like MD said, because we want to make sure that we still keep that and make sure that when we are talking to like our family members, ellos no puedan entender, because obviously like in the DR, like if you were to talk to people, ellos no saben lo que tú estás diciendo. So my parents were really like adamant to make sure that like, no, like when you talk to people, make sure that you don't mix the two, even though I still do it sometimes and I still don't know how to say certain things, even though like I was born and raised there. But since I got here and English was like the main thing I was supposed to speak, like I got immersed in that, and then I had to speak English all the time. So I tend to sometimes forget certain words. And so my parents get really, really mad when I do that and I don't know how to say the word in Spanish. So I think we still keep, again, like we have a lot of traditions that we still keep, and I don't think I would change it. I would still want my son to also be as Dominican as we are, because those are our roots. But I also know that in the future, that may not be the same, because he's going to have kids and his kids are going to have kids. And at some point we might have, we may lose that if we don't continue to like push it on them and make sure that they don't forget their roots.
I grew up in a very Christian family. Okay, so my family, I grew up as Jehovah's Witness, so we didn't do a lot of those celebrations and stuff like that. But I would say mainly the only traditions that I have, just like Jana, is basically the food. Like up to this day, I still cook my Dominican food. Don't get me wrong. I've been expanding my horizon when it comes to the kitchen. I could cook from anywhere in the world. But every once in a while, I still make my mango con mi huevito revolteado and mi salami. But yeah, I mean, growing up in the Dominican Republic in a very Christian and a strict family, we don't have many traditions, but one of them was like to always be true to ourselves. So even though I have come to this country, especially New York City, you have people from all over the world. So you get to experience many Latin cultures. Like we have Mexican, South American, Caribbean, and stuff like that. But I still, true to myself within the confinements or my learning from my childhood, if you know what I mean. So other than tradition-wise, I don't really celebrate holidays and stuff like that. But other than that, yeah.
Okay, so for our next question is, to any of you that feel comfortable answering, did your parents ever teach you or talk about the true Dominican history, such as where we come from, or did you learn this después de grande?
So my family, my dad's really, really into history. So for us, it was more of, he always had the Dominican news on. So he rotated from the Dominican news, Telemundo, Univision, and then a little bit of English with the subtitles down there, so he knew what was going on. So whenever something happened in the country, he will give us like a mini history lesson, or he'll explain to us as to why they couldn't do something. Like, for example, if in DR they might have changed some type of law and they're like, no, they shouldn't do that because of the Constitution. But besides that, and then also as I grew up, I also learned a little more of the history, because when I did my study abroad, I chose to do my study abroad in Dominican Republic, even though I've been there multiple times. And I chose because even though when I was younger, I used to go for the summers, I never went to the museums to learn the history. while my study abroad, they took their time to like, let's go to the museum, the biggest museum in Santiago, and that way we can learn about the history. Let's go here because of this part of the history of the Dominican Republic. So I think I had got a mixture of both, of like as I grew up and then from my parents.
I would say that my parents did not really teach me about the Dominican history as much as I would have liked to. But majority of the information that I got, it was from like going to museums, doing my own research myself. My dad did, however, was alive when the Dominican War happened, when they were doing, oh, I forgot, it was like in the 50s or something like that. It was one of those big wars that happened, the wars that happened in DR. And it really put things in perspective for me, because one thing is to read something from a textbook, and and it's a different when you hear someone's account or actually living there. My dad was about 10 to 11 years old, and he remembers walking outside and people just getting shoot up and killed right in front of him. And it's like one of those things that made me realize, like, wait, I don't really know much about my own history, and that's something that I, every once in a while I indulge into, like learning and stuff. And also the fact that they waited until I was older for me to find out that my grandmother was Haitian. So yeah, so growing up, yeah, I'm gonna leave that for another questions, but yeah, it really struck me, like it really shook me to my core, the fact that growing up I thought it was okay, like many of us, some of our family comes from like south of Spain, north of South Africa and stuff like that. But I didn't know like I was Haitian. And I used to defend a lot of Haitians kids in my school. So I was like, I never understood why I had the need for it until I learned that my grandmother was Haitian. And yeah,
I
it
think
was
that's
really
awesome.
awakening. I'm going to answer that question in more detail later.
Any other one of you want to answer that question?
Edmi, you just gave todas las dominicanas una responsabilidad to take our children or sobrinos or sobrinas to the museum, because ever since I was little, my parents were sending me the entire summer to the yard. And now I have a 7-year-old, and ever since he was a year old, he's been going to the art, and I've never thought of taking him to a museum. A mí lo que me llevaban era agua splash, si estaba en Mao, si estaba en Mao, I forgot the name, agua azul en Mao. So it was like, it was all just fun. O allá simplemente intentaban de llevar a un lugar que fuera like americano for me to start to feel like back home. But I've never thought about that. So I hope any other Dominicanas or anyone else listening.
I know I'm the moderator, but I do have something to share.
Yes.
Now that Rosa said that, I found it so funny because after I moved to the US, I was 12. And I remember when I went back for the first time to the R, my mom me llevó a las Cuevas de la Maravilla. And I was like, Mami, ¿por qué tú nunca me llevaste? Like, I've lived in this country for 12 years and I never knew this beauty, And I just thought it was so funny at the time because I'm like, I lived in this country for this long and nunca, like, a los Tres Ojos, nunca hemos ido ahí. And it took for me to leave my country, to go back and be like, yo, I want to experience this. And I just think it's funny that sometimes when you are in your country, you don't tend to appreciate the beauty, the museums, the excursions that you can be doing. You're just living your life, and you don't get to see like other things. And I feel like we do the same even in the US too, like even in Michigan, I live in Michigan, so there's a lot to see here, and yet I have not seen it all, just so you know.
Same here.
Yeah.
I just wanted to leave with that, que is our responsibility when we go back and really take our children and sobrinas and to teach our family also. Because I just grew up, my uncle, él era marinero and trabajaba like Fort Trujillo. So I would hear him making comments about Trujillo. Some family members would say que él era bueno, otros decían que era malo. So I only got to pick up bits and pieces, but the same here. No one has ever sat down to talk to me about Dominican history. So
by the way, for everybody listening though, and you may not know about Trujillo, he was like a president of the Dominican Republic.
A dictator.
Yeah. Way back then, and he was definitely not a good one. So if you want to research about him, his name was Rafael Leonidas Trujillo, and that's some history if you want to learn about that.
And also, if you also go to the museum, have to acknowledge that, like, for example, I went to the one in Santiago. They gloss over the part of how there was slavery in Dominican Republic. It is a quick glance. If you don't pay attention, it's not there. So if you do go to a museum, have to also educate you that they cover and gloss parts of the history that is not in the museum, that you have to do the extra work to educate yourself on.
Okay, so with that being said, we're gonna move on to our next question. And this is for Jatna and Marilisa. Do any of you identify as Afro-Latina? Why or why not?
Honestly speaking, growing up, when I used to live in the Dominican Republic, I did not identify myself an Afro-Latina. I grew up, you know what? I was Dominican. That's all everybody needed to know. I was Dominican. But coming into the United States and having to, in a sense, experience racism, in a sense, segregation, if you want to call it too, I do identify myself as an Afro-Latina, and I'm proud of my roots. Like I previously said, my family, I have family from many parts of the world, and also Haitians. And I remember going to like any office, honestly, when they ask you about your race and your ethnicity, I used to pick other, because I was like, yeah, I am not Black. I used to identify myself as a Hispanic ethnicity, when the question about ethnicity, but when it comes to race, I would never be like, no, I'm Black. No, but now I'm like, no, I am. And that's something that I cannot deny. And actually, I learned to embrace who I am. And yeah.
Yes, queen. So
Afro-Latina here.
so for me specifically, I know that the term is a little like newer to all of us and how people use it. And so while I was doing research about it, I tend to see, like, when I was, looking like online, like, okay, so let me see like what women do identify as Afro-Latinas, because I don't want to be out there trying to identify as something that I might not be and offend someone else by doing that. So when I was doing that research, and I saw online that most women that identified as Afro-Latina look like you, Marilisa, and like Emily, like Amara La Negra, like she identifies as that. And I was like, well, I definitely don't look like her. So I felt like I shouldn't be identifying as that, because first of all, my skin color, and second of all, like one of the traits of Afro-Latinas is like having your hair like curly hair. And so natural curly hair, which I don't. And so I felt like, you know what, I can't really identify as that, because I really don't want to offend anyone. So for me, I'm just, if someone asks me, I'm just Latina. And if they say like, yeah, but where were you born? Then I'd be like, oh, I'm Dominican. And that's pretty much how I identify as.
And I think that's why when I started the podcast, what I said was, with everything happening with Black Lives Matters, I feel like a lot of people, because I look a certain way, obviously I'm not white like my sister. Even when we're together, they think we're like primas, or like, oh, from the same mom, same dad, which is rude, first of all. But anyways, that's besides the point. But I feel like with this movement, a lot of people have been asking me, because I look a certain way. I have, my hair is natural, it's curly. My sister is straight and Black, like color of hair. And mine is like brown. She's white, I'm dark in comparison to our skin colors. So I feel like a lot of people have asked, like, what do you identify as? And honestly, like she said, I was born and raised in the DR, so therefore I was always a Dominican. I never thought that I needed to be identified as something else, until I came here. This is a melting pot. You have anything and everything in every single state. And that's when I started to think like, oh shoot, like maybe I need to like start doing some research and see if I should be identifying as something else. But something that I want to tell people, me being a therapist, is like, you are who you want to be. If you are white and you want to identify as an Afro-Latina, you can. Just because you're not like dark skin and you don't have curly hair doesn't mean that you cannot be Afro-Latina. Because at the end of the day, my sister, she has Black in her family. So it will be very unrealistic for her to sit here and be like, no, yo soy blanca or yo soy whatever the hell she wants to say, you know. At the end of the day, it's what makes you happy and who you are. And if you feel comfortable identifying as whatever it is that you identify as, by all means do that. And that's just the therapist in me, just saying. Anyone else has anything to say with this question? Okay, so I'm gonna move on to our next question. And this one is for Rosie and Marilisa. What is one thing your family always told you to do or not to do when it comes to your roots, race, and skin color?
For me is I still to this day I hear my aunts saying, "Cásate con blanquito de ojos azules." And I grew up thinking so many things were normal. Like I just thought they wanted me because nací en este país, vivo en este país, o que tengo que, like, siempre está eso de que los dominicanos son machistas, esto y lo otro. But I never thought they were really saying it para arreglar la raza. Like I would hear them saying that in other ways, other conversations, but when they would speak to me directly, nunca me decían que yo me tenía que casar con un blanquito de ojos azules para arreglar la raza specifically. So después yo me caso con un dominicano de Montecristi, and I would hear some family members diciendo, pues entonces te casaste con un campesino. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, so it's like, yes, y realmente así fue lo mismo con mi mamá. Ella de la capital, mi papá del Cibao, le decían, no, tú te vas a morir de hambre porque tú te casaste con un campesino. So like, it's just so hurtful de que aún así en la misma raza te dicen qué hacer y no hacer. Como que tú a lo mejor piensas de que no, que eso nada más en otras razas. No, adentro de nosotros somos donde más daño nos hacemos. Y realmente yo creciendo, yo nunca me daba cuenta porque yo crecí, así como Marilisa dijo, like, I try to see the good in everyone. I think that has held me back from, I think it has just made me so naive to not really read between the lines or see the writings on the wall. When someone's telling me something indirectly, I don't catch it, you know, or saying, de que, pero tú eres dominicana, like, oh, tú eres bonita. And it's like, I shouldn't take that as a compliment. So, you know, no. Y son cosas que growing up, just now talking to the friends and stuff, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's not even a compliment. Like that's just so rude. And también, I mean, I'll talk more about the hair later, but to me, that was really more one of the things that has stuck to me till this day. Como like, yo tengo dos hijos y yo no quiero decir, like, yo, aquí en mi casa nunca se habla de que tenga amiguito de color o de otra raza, like that. We don't even speak about that. Pero growing up, sí se escuchaba eso, like, no me traiga un novio moreno aquí, like, you know, like, so, y yo, so it was just like, como que yo no entendía por qué, y también es como lo que pasa en the media, como que hacen ver de que alguien de ese color es malo y realmente no es así. Pero como que yo crecí, yo nunca entendía eso, también por la razón de que uno nunca se sentaba a hablar de por qué, y yo nunca preguntaba por qué. Yo era una niña obediente y yo hacía lo que me decían. Like, okay, una tía, mi padre, tío, tía, whoever, realmente en mi casa no pasaba, era más como people outside my household, you know. So, yo decía, ellos son grandes, yo los tengo que respetar. So, para mí eso es algo que realmente duele y que yo digo, like, eso no es normal y y algo que tengo que cortar, que yo no puedo dejar que mis hijos escuchen algo así.
It was your reality and you didn't know any better, so therefore you're like, oh, this is what it is, you know, and you didn't think to question it. And a lot of people do that, you know, because we don't know any better.
Yeah. So anyone listening, like, you're never too old to stand up.
Yo crecí como yo le dije antes, I grew up in a very Christian household, for which I'm very glad that I did, because my parents were like, you need to love everyone. No matter what they're from, love everyone equally. They could be from Africa, from Asia, from Europe, from the United States, love everyone equally. However, my grandma, she was not Christian. Boy, she used to give me hell. Ella decía, mira, que tú tienes un enamorado, pero he's darker than you. And I was like, ¿y entonces? ¿Y cuál es el problema? No, como dijo Rosibel, tú tienes que arreglar la raza. No, yo no quiero que aquí me traigan muchachos quemaditos. I never thought about it. Like, I used to be like, but why? Why? He's a good person, or nah, he's a good person, whatever the case might be. Why? Y es como dice Reciber, uno sin darse cuenta, a uno lo estaban moldeando tu mindset en pensar de que, okay, I'm dark skinned, but I need to achieve a level of whiteness, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Arregla la raza, consíguete un hombre alto, piel clara, ojos azules, rubio. ¿Para qué?
First of all, ¿dónde vamos a encontrar ese tigre? Eso es lo que yo quiero saber.
So coming into the United States, I used to be like, a veces habían hombres y muchachos que me tiraban y decían que yo tenía como, no, I'm not gonna lie, I had a little bit of prejudice. I used to be like, oh, yeah, but you're a little darker than me. Until I started getting to know more people from different cultures, and I realized, why am I being like this? I am no better than anybody else, bottom line. So, a mí me decían, no, que los dominicanos esto, que los puertorriqueños esto. And guess what? My husband he's half and half Dominican, half Puerto Rican. So I got the best of the two worlds. But yeah, it's one of those things that honestly, I don't want to pass it down to my son. It's not a good trait. We all equally on the God's eye at the end of the day. And nobody should be above anybody else. We all either here, or here. But I don't like this. This should never be,
I think there's something to what you're saying in the sense that, everything starts at home. And whether we want to admit it or not, as parents, todo lo que tú haces, you're teaching your children, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And racism is taught, tú le enseñas a alguien a ser, tú no naces con racismo, a ti te enseñan a ser racista. Whether esa persona o ese papá is just like, no, eso fue lo que mi papá y mi mamá me enseñaron. It's a cycle. It comes down through generation. Y tú le sigues enseñando, como papi y mami me enseñaron eso, yo le voy a enseñar eso a mis hijos. And because they taught you, tu papá y tu mamá, they can't do no wrong. So therefore, I have to teach it the same way to my children when it's not the same. So, I think this is so important what you just said, because everything starts at home. And parents, it is your job to teach your children better. Go ahead, Emily.
For me, it's interesting listening to you guys, because like in my household, my parents, mi papá y mi mamá no era así, era como, tú no eres mejor que nadie era mejor que tú. So, respeto a todos lados. Entonces, era ama y mi mamá era, tú te puedes casar con cualquier persona que tú quieras, pero que te trate bien. Pero afuera de la casa, that's when you got more comments. Because it would be like, I'll be in DR and I'll be playing the sun because I love the sun. I was like, ooh, there's the sun out here. In Michigan, you barely get sun. And my aunt would tell me, no te tienes sol que te va a poner como una haitiana. O va a ser oscura como tu papá. And myself, I was a very responsive child. So, para mí, ellos me veían como una malcriada, porque yo de una vez respondía, ¿y qué tiene mi papá? Y sí, yo quiero ser el mismo color de mi papá. ¿Y qué? Y después iban a tener que llamar a mi papá y cosas así, después hablar con él y tú sabes, calmarla, tú sabes, cosas así. But I think, and I never got the whole married to blanquear la raza, but I did go on a date with somebody and somebody asked me that question, do you believe in such a statement? And I was like, I was so offended. I'm like, how dare you ask me such a question? That, like, don't you see me? Like, how dare you? But then I understood that the Dominicans that he hung around with, they grew up with that phrase. So they had that mindset. And I was like, okay, that makes sense, but don't ask me such a question. I was ready to walk out right then and there just because of that question.
To piggyback on Emmy, una de las cosas que realmente yo no entiendo es, y ¿sabes qué? Lo voy a decir. Nosotros los dominicanos mucho somos muy racistas, sin saberlo. nosotros creemos que personas de otros países no son una porquería que no sirven. ¿Y por qué? Nosotros siempre, no, tú tienes que, no te juntes con los boricuas. No te juntes con los mexicanos. Ven acá, pero nosotros, yo creo que de todas las islas del Caribe, nosotros somos los más quemaditos. And we are the most prideful one. We think, honestly speaking, we think that we are better than anybody. Why? Why is that? Up to this day, I still have my father's family, que cuando ven a mi marido, ay, pero tú hiciste muy bien, porque él es un blanquito. So, wait, so you mean to tell me if I would have met a guy who might be darker than me, that wasn't gonna be okay? Even if that person treated me okay, that was not gonna be okay. Why? It's like it's rough. it has been rough.
No,
And
it
it's
is.
like Loana said, it's like okay, this is something that goes down from one generation to another. But at what point are we gonna break the cycle? At what point we're gonna realize, hey, this has been wrong forever. When are we gonna start making better choices?
Pero Marilisa, no te vayas muy lejos, because you said that we are very racist against other cultures or other ethnicities. Pero even within our own culture, we're very racist. Like, mi papá, yo me acuerdo bien diciendo, yo decía que yo nunca me iba a casar con alguien más oscuro que yo. Mi papá es súper blanco, obviously, you guys are seeing my sister. Pero, look at me, mi mamá es oscurita, and I was just like, ¿qué pasó con mami? No que tú no te ibas a casar con nadie más oscuro que tú, ¿qué pasó? You know, so we tend to be very racist within our own culture también. Or like cuando vemos un dominicano más oscuro que uno, it's like, ¿de dónde tú eres? Tú eres haitiano, you know. Things like that, you know, and it's just like, how is that okay? Why saying that it's okay within our own people?
And so the one thing I wanted to say was that that's a good point that you brought up, Marilisa, because she said, like, at what point do we stop the cycle? And I think as millennials, we need to start educating our kids and making sure that they don't commit, they don't make the same mistakes we made. They don't learn the things that our parents are teaching us. So I think it's our job, as millennials and moving forward, to ensure that our kids have a different, you know what I mean? Like, are educated about this and have a different, perspective about things and be inclusive, with everyone else. And so that's when we stop the cycle.
I think all these questions are interconnected, just for the listeners. So the next question is to all of you. Have your family ever tried to change something about your looks or appearance just so you could fit in with the rest? Or could you look better, whatever the definition of better may be?
So to me is el pelo. Yo dejé de deslizarme after I was 18 years old. Pero todos los sábados era yo en un salón a estericarme tagreña, como me decían. Y un deslizado, like, esa cosa tiene un bajo. I never understood why I had to put it on. But como ya era niña obediente, I did as my mommy told me. And this week I was talking to another friend, and it was like, I never thought it was wrong que me decían, tú tienes pelo malo. Like, why can't they just say you have texture hair, right? And I'm like, I never thought about that. I was like, I never thought of saying, no, I have texture hair, yo no tengo pelo malo. So that's something que yo no puedo decir ya de que, no, tú tienes pelo malo. Y todavía, yo en el verano me dejo mi pelo rizo. Y mami me dice, tú no te ves profesional yendo a la oficina con ese pelo así. And I'm just like, pero ¿y por qué? Like, este es mi pelo, yo lo tuviera así más tiempo si en el invierno con esta nieve aquí no me diera gripe, saliendo con el pelo mojado. And this weekend I was also realizing, when I would go to DR, my aunts se iba a la playa, de una vez a un salón, and it was just like, oh my gosh, maybe because they are lighter skinned than me, they have el pelo bueno and all of that. And I'm like, maybe they don't like curly hair. Maybe parece que yo no le gustaba eso. And it's just like, así como how we're just been listening to this is in the art, there's so much of that. And we don't, like me specifically, I never realized it. Like now, I just like, oh my gosh, I am learning a whole complete new world. And to me, es eso del pelo. It's just like, también a veces en la forma de vestir, like, oh, pero no te pongas todos esos colores. Y tú vayas así. Tú te vas a poner eso. And
Qué ridícula.
yes. Como like now some of my family members have learned that we're like, tú te ves naca así? I'm like, well, yo me siento bien así. So it's like, of trying to fit in, it's like, hey, like, if just because like, oh, because I'm going to go to an office on a blanquito doesn't mean I have to dress like them. I'm going to still look like a Latina. I'm still going to go and take la comida pero, y tú vas a llevar a tu amiga blanquita a comer comida dominicana. I'm like, yeah, if she wants to hang out with me, she's going to have to learn some of my food. Like I eat some of her food. So those are just my things that I say, like people in my family have tried to change things or make me feel like I need to change my appearance.
I think, Rosie, you're saying something very important in the sense of, and this is not necessarily just like mental health, pero normalizing. I feel like a lot of people within culture, they normalize negative connotations as like, pelo malo. Like, that's offensive, pero porque no lo dicen tanto, we're like, that's my reality, so therefore yo tengo el pelo malo and that's okay. That's one trait that I have, and normalizing, I think every culture does that, and that's why we are in the mess that we are in, because within our family, within our culture, we normalize all these negative biases and stereotypes and connotations, and we make it okay. So like Jana said, it is our job as our generation to change these stereotypes, to normalize all these negative connotations. And Emily, you go first, and then Marilisa, if you can hold on to that thought.
No, for me, I had like here in the United States, you can't find like whitening creams. So in DR, they do have a section. So I will have family members suggest whitening creams that I should wear because I will be playing in the sun for too long and I was getting too dark for them. And I'll just be like, oh no, ma'am, I'm not wearing that. But not only that, but I did have derisado until the age of 14. So basically my mom loved my curly hair, but I was the one that chose to get a derisado because I was in DR, or my cousin had long flowy hair because they had a derisado. Then I called her up, I'm like, I want one too. And she's just like, I don't know about that. Like, I don't think you should, but we went away and went with it. And then growing up until I decided to go natural, I did grow up with the pelo bueno, pelo malo. Y el que quiere pelo bueno, aguanta jalones, ¿verdad? Entonces, not only that, but then when I went natural, then I started like talking to people because people were telling me, like my mom she loved that I was going natural. But the term still pelo bueno, pelo malo, she was still using that. I was like, oh no, we need to have a discussion about this because my pelo is not malo. Okay, this is something that it is the standard of European beauty that is taught onto us to believe that curly hair is bad, and we need. And I'll go like into a whole rant with her, and I'll be like, listen, I'm gonna need you to stop using this term because this is not a good term. And not only that, but then when I went to DR and when I wear my hair curly, I remember last time I went, they would just sit there, watch me do my hair, like in awe. They're like, ¿y cómo tú te vas a hacer pelo? ¿Y cómo tú te vas a poner esto? ¿Y qué tú vas a hacer para cuando tú vayas a la playa? I'm like, para arriba, así mismo, normal, como tú me ves ahora. And not only that, but then you also had, I remember straightening it. I haven't straightened in a few years now, but they were like, ahora tú sí te pareces gente. And I was like, oh, pero la última 2-3 semanas que yo estaba aquí, yo nunca me parecí gente. Okay, ya yo veo cómo son las cosas, ya yo veo.
No, I was going to say something about on the hair topic. No, eso es lo mismo. Yo creo que todos nosotros todas las que tenemos el pelo así bien rizado, hemos sido afectadas con esa misma frase. Por ejemplo, hace varios años estuve en Santo Domingo. I was visiting my grandma and había un calor. A mí el pelo mío se pone bien puffy por el heat and la humidity. So yo me lavo la cabeza and I'm ready to go outside. My grandma literally stopped me before I left her house. She was like, ¿y para dónde tú vas? I was like, oh, yo tengo que hacer algo allá. Con ese pelo así, con ese pajón, tú no estás peinada. Ven, amárrate ese pelo a algo. It's just like, And I'm thinking, that's how I wear my hair in the summer in the United States. Why can't I do this here? So she literally had my aunt take me to a hair salon to get my hair done just so I could go to the supermarket. Because she was basically saying que yo parecía una loca con el pelo así.
And I think with the whole topic of hair, you guys, we could do like a whole podcast just about hair texture, you know? And also, to make it clear, Rosibel es light-skinned Dominican y tiene texture hair. So, los dominicanos blancos que están aquí pensando que yo no tengo, you know, roots, African roots, pero gente blanca puede tener pelo malo, and I'm quoting in airs because I don't agree with that term either. But I'm saying, you know, tú puedes ser blanco y tener el pelo malo, you know, tú puedes tener texture hair. Just because you're dark doesn't, by association, doesn't mean therefore you have bad pelo, malo, or whatever, you know. So first of all, we should change that, como dijo Rosy. Texture hair will be a better, educate yourself right now and say texture hair rather than pelo malo bueno, because there's no such a thing as pelo malo o pelo bueno. Todos los pelos son buenos, in my opinion. So we're gonna move on to our next question, and it's for Marilisa and Jatna. Have you ever personally experienced racism in the U.S. or in the DR? What happened and how did you react?
I personally, I should say that usually when people see me and before I speak, I could cover and pass as white, let's be honest, because like you guys were saying, the whole pelo bueno, pelo malo, like supuestamente yo tengo pelo bueno, and then my skin color is like, you know, I'm light skinned, so people normally, like, I don't really get the whole, like, you know, racism thing or the colorism thing, just because I kind of look, you know, I could tend to pass as white, if, you know, if anything. But the problem is that when I speak, that's a different story. So when they see me and then I start speaking, then it starts like microaggressions. So for those of you who don't know what microaggression is per the dictionary, just so you know we're clear, microaggression is a subtle but offensive comment or action directed at a minority or other non-dominant group that is often unintentional or unconsciously reinforces a stereotype. Again, that's based on the dictionary. So I have experienced microaggressions every time I speak. You know, they would ask me like, oh, you sound Caribbean, like, oh, you have a cute accent, like, oh, you sound exotic, like, where are you from? So, you know, things like that are microaggressions, intentionally or unintentionally. And I think some people don't understand that when they make comments like that, they're being, like they're offensive, and they just don't. Some people may know, but some people may not know. And so, again, I haven't experienced like racism per se, but there's a lot of microaggression that I have experienced. And this is something that, to be honest, I don't know that it's going to change. You know what I mean? So reason why I feel like for people like us or for millennials, whether they're white or, whatever race they are, I think that's why we need to move forward and change and educate people so that we stop doing those things. So that's my experience.
So, tú eres exótica, tú eres un animal entonces. Mínimo. Now we call each other exotic, like we're animals. Go ahead, Marilisa.
Now, to piggyback on Jana, a couple of years ago, we went to Atlanta. So in the area where we were staying, there was not that many like Hispanic people. So I remember walking into a CVS and the guy was like, "Oh, are you Dominican?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, okay." And then we went into a hotel and the lady goes, she told me and my sister, "You guys look so exotic." I was like, and I'm looking at my sister, these people never seen Hispanic people down here or something? It was like, seriously? But anyway, to answer your questions, I have experienced a lot of racism, both here and in the Dominican Republic. But out of all the experiences that I have ever lived, the one that have actually struck with me the most, it was growing up in DR. When I was in school, there was this, as I said earlier, I always felt like a need to protect Haitian people, and I didn't know why until later on in life. So I had a classmate who was Haitian. That kid was amazing with like instrument, and he was really good at math. So sometimes we will help each other out doing homework, and sometimes during the recess, we will sit down in the in the recess area, whatever you want to call it. And there was this one time that they started spitting on him because he was Haitian, because he was like really dark. And I happened to be sitting next to him, and I got spit on me, and I got sand and earth thrown at us. And so I stood up for him because they actually cut him right above his eyebrow right here. And that experience with me, it was really rough because I was probably in sixth grade, fifth or sixth grade. So, you know, we were kids, and I basically stood up for him. And from that point on, until I finished my time in that school, I used to experience racism almost every time. Kids was like, oh, esta haitiana también, defendiendo a los haitianos. So, and that have always stuck with me, the fact that even though we were all kids and stuff like that, and it was supposed to be an elementary, you know, situation or whatever you want to call it, ese racismo, that really hurt me because he was a good kid. He was just helping me with my schoolwork. No era que nosotros estábamos haciendo, like they say, como dicen de los haitianos, it's not like he was doing voodoo or anything like that. He was helping me with schoolwork. And they threw stuff at us. They threw dirty water at us. That was all in the same day, by the way. And yeah. And it was really rough. And I feel like from that moment on, every other situation where I have experienced racism, I was like, yeah, it's not as bad as it. My way of thinking is like, okay, this is messed up, but it's not as bad as what I had already lived. Y eso es algo que siempre se me ha quedado. Que niños tan chiquitos hurting somebody just because of their skin color. Y después los 3 últimos años que yo tuve en esa escuela, I used to be bullied a lot just because I stood up for that kid at one time.
First of all, I want to say thank you so much for sharing your story. It takes balls sometimes to share negative, you know, thoughts and stories that we share, but I think you have such an important message to send to our listeners right now. Because like I said, again, everything starts at home. And like you said, children are being racist among each other. So for people that don't think que el racismo es like you teach racism, that's a perfect example. Como hay niños de 6, 5, 8, 10 años de edad bullying each other based on skin color. And this is why this is a call for everyone listening, not just millennials, everyone that's listening to this podcast right now. It is your job to teach other, educate other, teach other. Because racism and bullying and all these negative things are not okay for you to do something, to harm another human being just based on their skin color, if that makes sense. Thank you so much for sharing your story, seriously. Anyone else has anything to share? Go ahead, Emily.
It's interesting listening to her story because just like she said, how she experienced other racism in her life, but then she thinks like, oh, but it could be worse. And you start thinking like, yeah, like for example, for me, I have experienced it, but I think for me, because I remember reading the question, I couldn't think of many because to me, it almost like normalized it, or it wasn't as big as other people have gone through. So I'm like, oh, that's just like a regular, like almost like in my mind, I started thinking, that's like regular day right there. Like maybe somebody's following me through the store, or the different microaggressions from both communities, the Latino and Black community. Latinos be like, you're not Dominican enough, or they see me first, because of course society is going to view you first through your race, your nationality, and then your ethnicity. So of course, how can be in a Latino store and just wear my hair natural, and you can hear them make comments like, y está con este pajón, y esta no se peina, esto, or just treat me differently. And then you'll be in the Black community, be like, you're not Black enough because you didn't grow up doing X, Y, Z. So you get different little microaggressions that you just normalize it, or like you speak to somebody and they're listening to you speak Spanish, immediately it's like you're speaking that Mexican language. And I was like, hold on, we need to check you on many levels right here, but we're gonna correct you. We all speak Spanish. Okay, we're gonna start there. And then I'll be like, there's nothing wrong with Mexicans. And then they just start going down the list of how to correct that, just that little statement, because that's not right. So yeah, I think you just naturally normalize it over time unless it's a very strong, like blunt racism that really sticks with you. The other little ones, you're just like, oh, this is just nothing. This is just a regular day. Me walking outside and somebody's looking at me, or like crossing the street away from me, or clenching their purse or locking their door. It's just like, oh, regular day. Let's keep it going. Let's try to stay positive, because then every day you're just angry at the world.
And if you think about it, I think it's important what you're saying with normalizing. It's like racism is such a huge thing, you know? And it's like, I'm only one person. Mm-hmm. How can I make a change? So therefore, it's easier to normalize than to fight the system, you know? Because it is a system, you know? And it's something bigger than us. And it's going to take more than one person to change it. But it starts with one, you know, at the end of the day. And I think, again, going to everything that you guys are saying with normalizing, and also I think with what Marisela said, as human beings, we tend to remember all the negative experiences rather than the positive one. And this is something more for parents that I want you to think about, is that your children are going to remember all these negative experiences, and that's going to affect them internalized. And therefore, that's how mental health issues start rooting up. You internalize, you think, when someone tells you, I'm this every single day, whether you are not or you are, you're going to believe it. Si una persona te dice, yo soy estúpido todos los días, even if you're like the brightest person, tú vas a pensar que tú eres estúpido, porque esa persona me lo está diciendo todos los días, and I'm going to normalize it within myself too. So this is bigger than us, this is bigger than racism, and racism is connected to everything about a person, and how you see your worldview and how others see you. And taking into our last question, and this is for all of you. If there is one piece of advice you could give the new generation, what would it be?
My advice would be, it has been enough. It has been enough for all of us to endure what we have been enduring our whole life. We can be the best. I mean, we can be the best version of ourselves, and to break the cycle. That's it. We just got to break the cycle. And from now on, just set better standards and better patterns and teach our kids, hey, this is not right. You should treat everyone with kindness and with zero prejudice. That's my advice. Let's break this cycle.
For me, I would say, again, I want to repeat it because I know that at the moment, like the generation like that's going into like that now right now has like, taken over like the, you know, like the workforce per se, and is starting to like have kids and raise kids right now. I would say that, and yeah, to Loa's point, yes, like everyone should start doing this, but I feel like we have a job as that generation that's pretty much taking over, right, in the workforce and in the US, like as minorities too, because I know that by like there's about, specifically in Grand Rapids, there's about 73% of the people in Grand Rapids under the age 24 right now are people of color. So what does that tell you? So my thing, I want to say is that, again, you need to educate your kids. You have to make sure that we're teaching them to be, you know, inclusive, to make sure that we, like Marilisa mentioned, to treat everyone with kindness, and that we shouldn't look at people or like treat them based on their color. Like we should treat people the same, and we got to start at the house, at home.
My advice would be, is from personal experiences, what I would have gone back is the whole normalize. I grew up thinking all these things were normal. So it's finding your voice so that you know when to stand up for yourself and for others.
I would say educate yourself and then try to step into other people's cultures. Because even though, let's say you grew up in an area that's predominantly one community, what you're learning, your knowledge and your form of learning is coming from what you see on TV. And usually those are teaching you the stereotypes that clearly not everybody's the same in those communities. So stepping outside of your community and getting to know other people will help so much more.
Thank you so much for all of you sharing your stories and being so brave.
So I know that I dearly enjoyed this. So thank you, Edmi. Thank you, Marilisa, for taking the time to be with us both chicas on this lovely Sunday afternoon. Yes, that's how we are, boss. We're boss ladies because we took our Sunday afternoon. We're not like, oh, it's our lazy Sunday. We can't do this. No. So I just want to say thank you, chicas. We have definitely learned a lot today. We're still learning, and this is a time to educate ourselves more than ever, then to find our voice, to start advocating. That's keyword, advocating. Nosotras podemos comenzar en nuestra familia, cuando escuchamos comentarios, y así, comentarios, por ejemplo, microaggressions, cosas que hemos pensado que son normales y no son, porque estamos educándolos y aprendiendo que no es así, y así podemos poder comenzar a dar el ejemplo. Y no dejo de enfatizar esto, es especialmente para los que tenemos niños, hijas o hijos, sobrinos o sobrinas, porque ellos son el futuro. Sembremos con ejemplo para poder dar buenos frutos. So, hasta la próxima. Besos y abrazos. Chao.